Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey deep into the forgotten corners of America's national parks, places of endless wilderness, isolated trails, and vast stretches of land where help does not reach. Hidden beneath their beauty are 7 of the most disturbing and terrifying horror stories ever reported. Stories that expose what happens when people vanish beyond the last warning sign. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of America's national parks, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Cole, and this happened during my final summer working as a seasonal ranger in a national park most people only visit for photos and postcards. I took the job to escape people. After my divorce, silence felt safer than conversations, and the park promised plenty of it. Miles of forest, endless trails, and long nights alone in a ranger station older than my grandparents. At first, the quiet healed me. Black Pine Trail was my responsibility. 13 miles long. No cell service, no emergency call boxes. Visitors were warned not to hike it alone, but they always did. People never believe danger applies to them. 3 weeks into my posting, reports started coming in. Hikers missing hours after they were supposed to return. Campsites found abandoned, tents still standing, food untouched. No signs of struggle, no tracks leading away. At first, I blamed stupidity, bad planning, panic. Then I found a radio, crushed flat in the middle of the trail like something heavy had stepped on it. And that's when I realized the forest wasn't empty anymore. The missing hikers were written off as late returns. But I knew better. You learn patterns quickly in the wilderness. People leave trash, footprints, broken branches. Panic has a shape. These disappearances didn't. My supervisor told me to stop logging theories in my reports. Stick to facts, he said. But the facts didn't make sense. One hiker's boots were found neatly placed beside the trail. Another man's backpack was hanging from a tree branch 12 feet up, untouched by animals. The worst part was the sounds. On my 3rd night patrol, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, perfectly matching my pace. When I stopped, they stopped. When I turned around, there was nothing. No wind, no animals, just trees standing too close together. Later that night, my radio crackled to life. Not static, breathing. Heavy, wet breathing, followed by a whisper that used my name. Ethan, you missed one. That voice didn't belong to anyone in the park. And it was coming from somewhere deep inside Black Pine Trail. The next morning, I reported the radio incident. My supervisor laughed it off and blamed interference, but his eyes avoided mine. That told me everything. He knew something was wrong and didn't want it written down. I decided to hike Black Pine Trail alone, off schedule. No radio check-ins, no paperwork. Just me, my pack, and a growing sense that whatever was out there wanted attention. A mile in, the forest changed. The birds went silent first, then the wind. Even my footsteps sounded wrong, like the ground was swallowing the noise. I noticed carvings on the trees, deep vertical scratches, too wide and too evenly spaced to be made by animals. Then I found a campsite that wasn't on any map. The fire pit was cold, but the ashes were fresh. A ranger badge sat on a log nearby, half buried in dirt. It was old, outdated by decades. The name etched into it made my stomach drop. Ranger Thomas Hale. Missing. 1979. I suddenly understood why Black Pine Trail was never closed. That night, the knocking started. 3 slow knocks against the wooden walls of my ranger station. Not the door, the walls. I held my breath, gun in hand, telling myself it was an animal. But animals don't knock in patterns, and they don't move from wall to wall, circling a building patiently. Through the window, my flashlight caught movement between the trees. Something tall, bending unnaturally as it stepped closer. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its attention lock onto me, heavy and curious. The radio came alive again. "Ranger Cole," the voice whispered, calm and familiar. It was my own voice. "You forgot the rules." The knocking stopped. Then came footsteps inside the station. I realized too late that Black Pine Trail didn't just take hikers. It kept rangers. And whatever wore Ranger Hale's badge was coming to collect another. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of the station until dawn, guns shaking in my hands, eyes burning from fear and exhaustion. Nothing else happened, but the silence felt deliberate, like something was waiting for me to make the next move. At sunrise, I found footprints around the station. They weren't human, too long, too deep, and they stopped inches from the walls, circling the building in a perfect loop. I requested a transfer that morning. My supervisor finally snapped. He told me no one leaves early, not rangers assigned to Black Pine. "Finish the season," he said. "Then you can go." That afternoon, a hiker was reported missing. A teenage boy named Lucas. First solo hike. His mother's voice cracked over the phone as she begged us to find him before nightfall. Search protocol demanded I go. As I stepped onto Black Pine Trail, the radio crackled softly, almost lovingly. "Good," the voice whispered. "You brought another one." We found Lucas's backpack 2 miles in. It was neatly placed in the center of the trail, zipper open, water bottle still full. No blood, no signs of panic, just absence. As we pushed deeper, the forest thickened unnaturally. Trees leaned inward, blocking the sky. My fellow ranger, Mark, muttered that the trail felt wrong, like it had shifted since morning. That's when we heard Lucas calling for help. His voice echoed from off the trail, calm and steady, repeating the same sentence. "I'm over here, I'm fine." Too calm. Mark stepped toward the sound before I could stop him. The ground dipped suddenly, and he vanished from sight without a scream. I ran forward, but the forest swallowed the noise. When I reached the edge, there was no pit. No sign Mark had ever been there. Only his ranger hat, placed carefully on a stump. The radio hissed again. "1 for 1, it whispered. "Fair trade." I don't remember how long I stood there holding Mark's hat. Minutes, maybe longer. Time felt unreliable inside Black Pine, like the trail bent more than just space. I called his name until my throat burned, but the forest answered only with silence. Protocol said I should retreat and call for backup. Instead, I followed the voice. Lucas's voice. It drifted deeper into the trees, always just out of sight, always calm. The trail markings disappeared, replaced by old symbols carved into bark. Circles, lines, crude human shapes with arms stretched too long. They weren't warnings. They were records. I came upon a clearing I'd never seen before. In the center stood a ranger tower that wasn't on any map, its wood gray with age. Lights glowed faintly inside. Hanging from the railing were ranger badges, dozens of them, some rusted, some new. I spotted Mark's badge still clean, swaying gently as if freshly placed. The radio buzzed in my hand. "Come inside," the voice said. "You're almost family now." Inside the tower, the air smelled like damp wood and rot. Old logbooks lined the walls, their pages filled with names, dates, and trails crossed out in red. I flipped through them with shaking hands. Every ranger assigned to Black Pine had an ending written here. Some stopped mid-sentence. Some ended with a single word: stay. At the back of the room stood a tall shape facing the wall. It wore a ranger uniform stretched far beyond human proportions. Its limbs bent wrong, joints folding inward as it turned slowly toward me. Its face wasn't a face at all, just a suggestion of one, as if the forest had tried to remember what a man looked like and failed. "You protect the trail," it said in overlapping voices. "Rangers, hikers, Mark, Lucas. We keep the balance." I understood then. It didn't hunt out of hunger. It hunted out of duty. And it needed replacements. The door behind me closed on its own. I don't remember deciding to run, but my body moved before my mind could catch up. I shoved past the thing wearing the ranger uniform, and it didn't stop me. It only watched, tilting its head as if curious how far I would get. The forest exploded into motion. Trees groaned and bent, roots lifting from the ground like fingers reaching for my legs. The trail reappeared and vanished again, twisting back on itself, looping me in circles no matter how fast I ran. Every direction led me back toward the tower. Then I heard Mark's voice behind me, breaking, desperate. "Ethan, don't leave me here." I stopped. That was my mistake. The thing stood inches away now, close enough that I could see faces pressed beneath its skin, dozens of them, frozen in silent screams. Rangers, hikers, people who thought the badge meant protection. "You already belong," it said gently. "You stayed." I raised my gun, knowing it wouldn't matter. The radio crackled one last time. "Welcome to the trail." They found me 3 days later at the trailhead. Alive, dehydrated, barely coherent. I was discharged quietly. No interviews, no reports filed. Black Pine Trail was listed as temporarily closed for exactly 1 week. Then it reopened like nothing had happened. Mark was declared missing. Lucas, too. I never went back, but sometimes I wake up with dirt under my fingernails and pine needles in my bed. My old Ranger radio sits on my nightstand, battery long dead. Last night, it turned on by itself. "Season starting soon," the voice whispered. Calm, familiar, patient. "We're short a ranger." I checked the news this morning. Black Pine Trail is hiring. They always need someone willing to stay. And if you ever hike alone and hear footsteps matching yours exactly, don't turn around. My name is Daniel Reyes, and this happened during a solo backpacking trip I took to prove to myself that I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. I had just turned 32, freshly laid off, and desperate to feel in control of something, anything. The park brochure promised solitude, wide valleys, and ancient stone formations carved by time. What it didn't mention was how sound behaved there, or how easily it lied. Stone Valley was massive, open during the day, but at night, the rock walls swallowed light and distorted noise. Rangers warned hikers not to camp near the cliffs, but I ignored that advice. I wanted the view. The first night was peaceful, too peaceful. Around midnight, I heard my name echo across the valley. Clear, familiar. My own voice, calling from far away. I laughed it off. Wind, acoustics. Then it happened again, closer, and the voice said something I never say out loud, something only I should have known. The next morning, I found footprints circling my tent. They were barefoot, too narrow, and they stopped inches from where I'd been sleeping. I followed them out of curiosity I'd later regret. The prints led toward a narrow passage between two massive rock faces, a place the map labeled simply as unmarked route. No trail markers, no warnings. Inside, the air felt heavier. Every sound bounced back wrong, delayed, warped, sometimes answering questions I hadn't asked out loud. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Nothing. Then I heard myself speaking ahead of me, my voice echoing through the stone corridor. I shouldn't have come here. My heart hammered. I hadn't said that. As I backed away, the passage narrowed, stone walls pressing inward like ribs. Carved into the rock were names, hundreds of them, scratched deep and layered over each other. At the bottom of the wall, freshly etched, was one name still covered in stone dust: Daniel Reyes. And somewhere ahead, something laughed, using my voice. I stumbled backward out of the passage, my breath coming in sharp bursts, the echo of my own voice still bouncing behind me. When I reached open ground, the valley looked different. The cliffs felt closer, taller, like they had shifted while I wasn't looking. I tried to leave that morning. My GPS refused to lock, spinning endlessly as if I were standing still. Every direction looked familiar, yet wrong. Paths looping back toward the stone corridor, no matter how carefully I navigated. By midday, the voices returned. Not just mine anymore. I heard whispers layered over each other, speaking fragments of thoughts I'd never shared with anyone. Regrets, fears, memories I tried to forget. Each word echoed perfectly, as if the valley itself had memorized me. Near a dry riverbed, I found an old backpack half buried in dust. Inside was a journal. The entries started hopeful, excited. Then they became frantic. The final line was written deep into the paper, tearing it. It learns you by listening. Behind me, gravel shifted. Someone sighed, using my breath. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs screamed for air. When I finally collapsed, the valley answered with silence so heavy it rang in my ears. That night, I barricaded myself inside my tent. Headphones on, music blasting. It didn't help. The sound cut through everything, bending around the noise, whispering directly into my thoughts. I know why you're here. The voice was gentle now, comforting. It told me things I'd never admitted, about feeling replaceable, about fearing that if I disappeared, no one would notice. The ground vibrated softly, like distant breathing. Shadows stretched across the tent walls, mimicking my movements a second too late. Then the zipper moved, slowly, carefully. I grabbed my knife, hands shaking, as the voice spoke from inches away, perfectly calm. "You can leave," it said, "but you'll never stop echoing here." The zipper stopped halfway open, and something waited patiently on the other side, listening to every terrified thought I had left. I didn't open the tent. I didn't scream. I stayed perfectly still, convincing myself that silence was the only thing it couldn't steal from me. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The zipper slowly closed again, as if whatever was outside had decided I wasn't ready yet. At dawn, I packed in a hurry and started walking, choosing a direction at random. The valley looked endless, repeating itself like a broken memory. Every ridge felt familiar. Every bend looked like somewhere I had already been. By noon, I reached a stone arch I recognized from the map. Relief hit me hard, until I realized I had already passed it that morning. Scratched into the stone beneath the arch were fresh markings. Deep, violent, not names, sentences, fragments of thoughts I'd had since arriving. Fears, doubts, the exact words the voice had whispered to me the night before. At the bottom, newly carved and still dusted with stone powder, was a message written in my handwriting. "Stop thinking so loudly. The echo of my own nervous laugh came back wrong, mocking. By the second night, I understood the rule. It couldn't read my mind. It listened to it. Every fear I focused on came back louder. Every memory replayed itself through the rocks, shaped into something patient and cruel. I forced myself to think of nothing. Blankness, static. The valley hated that. The echoes became frantic, overlapping, confused. Voices tripping over each other as if searching for something to copy. I found a shallow cave and crawled inside, pressing my back against the stone, breathing slow and shallow. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath fogging the air. Outside, footsteps paced back and forth. Then the voice returned, but this time it was wrong, incomplete, struggling. "Daniel, I can't." It sounded angry now. The stone walls vibrated, hairline cracks spreading outward like veins. Dust rained down as the valley groaned in frustration. I smiled for the first time since arriving. It wasn't hunting me anymore. It was afraid of being left alone with its own silence. The valley didn't let me enjoy that victory for long. As I stepped out of the cave at first light, the silence felt different, focused, heavy. The echoes were gone, but the air felt crowded, like something was standing just out of sight, listening without responding. I followed what I hoped was the exit route, forcing my thoughts into dull repetition. Numbers, colors, anything meaningless. My head throbbed from the effort. Then I saw people. 3 hikers stood near a rock outcrop, backs turned, packs on their shoulders. Relief hit me so hard my knees nearly gave out. I called out to them, my voice cracking. They turned slowly. Every one of them had my face. Not masks, not reflections. My face at different moments in my life. Tired, hopeful, broken. They smiled in perfect unison. "You figured it out," they said together. "But you stayed too long." The stone beneath my feet vibrated, and I felt the valley inhale deeply, like a lung filling with air. I realized then it never planned to kill me. It wanted to keep me. I don't remember screaming, but my throat burned as I ran. The ground split ahead of me, revealing the stone corridor from before, the unmarked passage yawning open like a mouth. The echoes rushed back all at once, louder than ever, overlapping versions of me begging, laughing, crying. I tripped and slammed into the rock wall. Hands, stone cold and familiar, grabbed my arms, pulling me upright. The copies stood inches away now, their faces cracking like drying clay. "You don't need to think anymore," they whispered. "We'll do it for you." I fought harder than I ever have, not for my life, but for my voice. I forced a single thought to the surface, one sharp, focused memory of who I was before this place. The valley screamed. The stone corridor collapsed inward, the sound exploding outward in a shock wave that threw me backward into darkness. When I woke up, I was lying at the park entrance, covered in dust and blood, rescue lights flashing overhead. The valley was quiet again. Too quiet. I woke up in a hospital 2 towns away, with dehydration, a concussion, and no memory of how I'd escaped. The rangers said I'd been found wandering near the park entrance just before dawn, barefoot and repeating my name under my breath, like I was afraid to forget it. They told me Stone Valley had collapsed sections overnight, a rare geological event. The unmarked route was gone completely, sealed under tons of rock. When I asked about the names carved into the stone, the ranger's smile tightened. He said erosion plays tricks on stressed minds, that people imagine patterns when they're lost too long. Before I was discharged, a woman from search and rescue sat beside my bed. She didn't speak at first. Then she slid something onto the table. My journal, the one I never carried with me. Inside, The last page held a single sentence written in shaky ink. "I can still hear you thinking." I looked up to ask her where it came from. She was already gone. I don't camp anymore. I don't hike alone. I avoid quiet places where my thoughts can stretch too far. But Stone Valley didn't let me go completely. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, my thoughts echo back to me a second too late. Not loud, not distorted, just listening. Last week I found dust on my apartment floor. Pale gray, stone dust, leading from the door to my bedroom. My phone recorded a voice memo while I slept. It was my voice, calm, practiced. "I'm still here," it said. "You left an impression." The park reopened last month with new warning signs and updated maps. The unmarked route is gone, but people still report hearing their names echoing between the cliffs after dark. And every time I think about Stone Valley for too long, my thoughts feel heavier, like they're being weighed, measured, and quietly memorized. My name is Samantha Lane, and this happened during a winter retreat I took with 2 friends at a remote cabin near Crescent Lake. We rented the cabin online, hoping for solitude and a quiet weekend away from the city. The directions led us down narrow, snow-covered roads that quickly disappeared into the trees. By the time we arrived, the lake was frozen, black and reflective, and the cabin seemed older than its listing described. The first night was peaceful. Fire crackling, snow falling softly outside. But I began hearing whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind around the cabin, settling in the cracks. But the whispers were too precise. Names, questions, hints of conversations I'd had earlier in the day. I told myself it was my imagination. My friends were asleep. I should just ignore it. Then I heard my own voice respond, soft, unfamiliar, answering questions I hadn't asked out loud. And that's when the whispering started to form words. The next morning, my friends joked about me being jumpy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Every step outside the cabin left impressions in the fresh snow, but some tracks didn't match ours. Long, thin, and deliberately circling the cabin. We decided to explore the lake, carefully stepping onto the frozen surface. The ice was thick, but my gut twisted when I noticed faint scratches under the ice, moving in patterns I couldn't follow. The wind carried whispers, soft and melodic, almost coaxing us to kneel and listen. By evening, the whispers had escalated. They were now answering questions we hadn't asked yet, pointing out secrets we thought were safe in our own minds. My name, Samantha, repeated over and over, often accompanied by the voices of my friends, mimicking them perfectly. I tried to block it out, but it became impossible to sleep. Every creak of the cabin, every movement of snow outside felt purposeful, watching, judging. The lake was no longer frozen, it was alive. By the third night, we had barricaded the cabin doors, but the whispers didn't stop. They moved around us now, soft footsteps on the wooden floor, scraping along walls, circling the fireplace. My friends began seeing shadows in the corners of their eyes, figures that vanished when we looked directly at them. I stayed up, recording everything on my phone. The whispers became clearer, forming complete sentences, questions only we could answer. Why did you come here? Do you remember what you did? Who are you hiding from? I noticed frost forming on the inside of the windows, spelling out letters as if writing themselves. My name appeared first, then my friends. Each letter seemed to pulse, breathing like it had life. Suddenly, one of my friends, Mark, screamed. He pointed at the corner. I shined my flashlight, and for a split second, I saw dozens of pale faces pressed against the walls, mouths moving silently, eyes locked on us. Then they were gone, leaving only silence. heavy, expectant, and waiting. We tried to leave at dawn, but the path back to the road was gone. Snow covered everything uniformly, as if the forest had erased our trail. The lake reflected a sky darker than the night itself, freezing the horizon in shades of gray and black. The whispers followed us outside, not carried by the wind, but by thought, imprinted directly into our minds. They spoke in our voices now, perfectly mimicking our conversations, mocking our fear. "Run faster," they said in Mark's voice. "She'll never survive," they said in mine. A shadow moved across the frozen lake. It didn't walk. It glided, bending inhumanly over the ice, keeping pace with us no matter how far we ran. My friends wanted to turn back, to confront it, but I knew we couldn't. Whatever it was, it had learned us. Our patterns, our fears, our weaknesses. By evening, the cabin loomed behind us, closer than when we had left, doors wide open, inviting us back into the whispering darkness. We circled the lake, hoping to find a road or trail, but the forest seemed endless. Every tree looked the same, each bend of the frozen lake looping us back toward the cabin. Our breaths froze in midair, carrying the whispers straight to our ears, repeating secrets we hadn't spoken since childhood. I realized something terrifying. The whispers were feeding on our memories. The more we tried to ignore them, the louder and sharper they became. Every step felt watched. Every shadow shifted toward us. Mark tripped over a jagged root, and when I helped him up, his eyes were wide with panic. He whispered, "I saw it, behind me, watching us." I turned, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw dozens of shadowy figures on the ice, each copying our every movement. Then they vanished, leaving only the echo of our voices calling each other's names. We ran faster, driven by the feeling that the lake itself had become alive, bending and shaping reality to trap us inside. By evening, exhaustion hit us hard, but the whispers refused to relent. They now spoke in our voices simultaneously, overlapping, predicting our moves, imitating our panic. Every time we paused, they grew louder, accusing, probing our minds. We found a small clearing near a cluster of rocks and tried to catch our breath. The wind shifted, carrying a single clear phrase, my own voice repeating, "You can't leave." I looked at the lake. The ice shimmered unnaturally, reflecting not the night sky, but faint silhouettes of the cabin and hundreds of shadowy faces, frozen mid-motion. They weren't distant anymore. They were beneath the ice, moving in impossible ways. I whispered to my friends that we should climb the rocks and stay off the ice. But Mark refused. He said it was calling to him, familiar and irresistible. The moment he stepped onto the ice, the shadows surged toward him, rising beneath the frozen surface. His scream was swallowed instantly by the valley. I ran, ignoring everything, driven by the raw need to survive. By midnight, I was completely alone. The forest had gone silent, but the lake never stopped moving. Shadows skated across the ice, forming shapes I couldn't recognize. My legs were numb, my lungs burning, but I couldn't stop watching. Then I heard it. A single voice, clear, deliberate, my own. "Come back." I froze. The cabin doors were wide open again, glowing faintly in the moonlight, inviting. I wanted to run the other way, but my feet moved before my mind could resist. Each step closer, the whispers multiplied, weaving together memories, fears, and regrets into something tangible, alive. The air thickened, making it hard to breathe. From the ice, shapes began rising slowly, human but distorted, reaching toward me with elongated arms and blank, pale faces. The lake reflected my own terrified expression back at me, except it wasn't mine. It was the shadow me, waiting to replace me. I realized the whispers weren't just voices. They were a trap, waiting for me to join them. I ran, but the ice beneath me shifted unnaturally. Every step I took seemed to stretch time. The shadows followed without sound, rising, bending, mimicking my movements exactly. The whispers became screams, overlapping in a deafening chorus. My voice, my friends, voices I didn't recognize, accusing, mocking, commanding. I tripped near the center of the lake. The ice cracked. A shadow hand shot up and grabbed my ankle, cold as stone. My scream shattered the night, echoing endlessly, feeding the valley. I kicked and pulled, tearing free, but I knew it had left a mark. Something waiting beneath the ice, patient, watching, learning. I stumbled to the shore, collapsing among the pines. The cabin loomed behind me, impossibly close. Its door creaked open, and I felt a pull in my chest, a voice whispering sweetly in my mind. "You belong here." I scrambled into the forest, running blind, knowing the lake had memorized me completely. I don't remember how long I ran before I found the main road. My legs were shredded from ice and snow, my lungs burned. My mind felt raw, stretched thin by the whispers. Behind me, the lake glimmered faintly, black and still. But I knew it was lying. The next morning, rescue teams found me near the highway, collapsing in the snow, mumbling incoherently. They asked about my friends, but I couldn't answer. Their faces, their voices, they were gone, swallowed by the lake, replaced by echoes I could never unhear. Later, I learned the cabin was owned by a caretaker who had vanished years ago. Locals whispered that Crescent Lake was cursed, that anyone alone for too long became part of the lake itself. Trapped in reflection, voice used as bait for the next trespasser. I kept my voice quiet ever since. Every time I speak alone, I feel the lake listening, remembering. I don't camp anymore. I don't hike alone. But the memory and the whispers follow me wherever I go. Even now, years later, the lake calls me in dreams. I wake with frost on my bedroom windows, whispers echoing faintly in the corners of the room. Sometimes my reflection moves differently than I do, a shadow version smiling back at me. The winter storms bring memories of the cabin. During nights of heavy snow, I hear my name, soft and coaxing, promising safety and warmth. My heart races, knowing it's the same voice I once heard on the ice, the same one that wanted me to stay. I've avoided the wilderness entirely, but a part of me knows it waits, patient, memorizing every thought, every fear. One day, I may speak too loudly, think too deeply, or wander too far. And when that happens, Crescent Lake will rise again, quiet and black, waiting to welcome me home. I never speak its name aloud. It already knows who I am. My name is Elliot Harper, and this happened on a solo hiking trip I took deep into Whispering Pines National Park. I had always loved remote trails, quiet, untouched, far from anyone. But this trip was different. The park was rumored to have disappearing trails and hikers who never returned. Though I dismissed the stories as tourist exaggerations, the first day was perfect. Crisp air, sunlight filtering through towering pines, birds calling in the distance. The trail wound steeply through dense forest, narrow and winding. I felt invigorated, confident in my experience and gear. By late afternoon, the forest grew quiet. Too quiet. The rustle of leaves disappeared. Shadows thickened unnaturally. I thought I saw a figure in the distance, a man in a dark coat, standing completely still between two trees. When I called out, he vanished. The trail started twisting in ways that didn't match my map. Every landmark I thought I remembered reappeared ahead, as if the forest had folded in on itself. By evening, I realized I was lost. The trail no longer matched the map, and every turn led me deeper into the forest. Panic rose slowly but relentlessly. I tried to retrace my steps, but landmarks repeated themselves like a cruel joke. Every fallen log, moss-covered rock, and twisted tree felt familiar and wrong. The whispers began just as the sun dipped behind the trees. At first, faint, indistinct murmurs carried on the wind. Then the words became clearer, echoing from every direction. My name, my fears, thoughts I had never shared aloud. I stumbled upon a small clearing with a dry creek bed. In the dim light, I noticed footprints circling the clearing in perfect loops. Not animal tracks. Human, barefoot, precise. The prints sometimes led toward me, sometimes away, but always returned to the center. I realized, with growing horror, that the forest wasn't random. It was alive. It was guiding me, shaping me, testing me. Night fell faster than I expected. The forest thickened, shadows pooling between the trunks, the sky barely visible through the dense canopy. My headlamp cut a thin cone of light through the darkness, illuminating patches of twisted roots and jagged rocks. But every step felt wrong. The trail seemed to vanish behind me as I moved forward, leaving only the feeling of being watched. The whispers grew louder. They weren't carried on the wind anymore. They spoke directly inside my mind. Names, confessions, and fears I had buried for years surfaced, spoken in voices that weren't mine. Each word weighed heavily, urging me to stop, to turn back, to surrender to the forest. Then I saw movement between the trees, glimpses of figures just out of reach. I tried to call out, but my voice echoed back at me distorted, as if the forest itself was mocking my fear. Every step I took felt guided, trapped in an invisible loop. The trail didn't lead anywhere. The forest was the maze, and I was its prey. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I couldn't tell. The forest had distorted time. Every tree I passed appeared identical to the last. Every clearing seemed like one I had already seen, yet subtly different, as if the woods were rearranging themselves around me. I stumbled upon a stone marker covered in moss, with carvings I couldn't recognize. As I approached, the whispers intensified, repeating my deepest regrets. I felt them pressing against my thoughts, nudging me toward the marker. My hand hovered over it, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. A sudden noise, branches snapping, made me spin around. A shadowy figure emerged from between the trees, human-shaped but impossibly tall, limbs bending unnaturally. It didn't speak, yet I felt its intentions. Curious, patient, hungry. Panic surged. I ran blindly through the woods, crashing through underbrush. The figure followed silently, never stopping, never tiring, a silent guardian of the vanishing trail. By midnight, exhaustion had set in, but stopping was not an option. Every sound, the crack of a branch, the whisper of the wind, felt amplified, like the forest was listening and waiting for me to falter. My headlamp flickered intermittently, throwing shadows that twisted and merged with the darkness. The figure reappeared, closer this time. Its elongated limbs moved unnaturally, yet silently, keeping pace with me without effort. I realized the forest wasn't just alive. It was aware. Each choice I made, every hesitation, was anticipated. The whispers began repeating the words I had muttered in frustration hours ago. I can't find it. I can't get out. I stumbled upon a narrow ravine and peered into the darkness below. A faint glow pulsed far beneath, like hundreds of tiny lanterns moving in patterns I couldn't comprehend. The whispers urged me toward it, promising safety, warmth, or at least answers. But something inside me screamed that the forest didn't care about my survival. It wanted compliance, surrender. I forced my legs to move, following the twisted path deeper into its maze. Hours blurred. I felt myself becoming part of the forest's rhythm. Steps, whispers, shadows, all intertwining. Each breath I took seemed measured, mirrored by the unseen presence. The figure followed at a distance, patient, almost expectant. The trail narrowed into a small clearing dominated by an ancient, gnarled tree. Its bark was scarred with old carvings, initials, dates, and symbols that made my skin crawl. The whispers intensified, echoing from the tree itself. It was repeating everything I had said and thought that day. Every fleeting fear, every doubt, every whispered regret. I sank to my knees, trying to block it out, but the forest pressed on my mind. A faint wind carried movement across the clearing, shadowy forms rising from the underbrush, circling me, eyes glinting faintly in the dark. I understood in that moment. The forest wasn't just guiding me. It was learning me, memorizing me, bending reality to its will. I forced myself to stand, knowing the only way out was to keep moving. By the 7th hour, I realized the forest was no longer following natural rules. Paths I had memorized disappeared behind me, only to reappear minutes later in slightly different forms. Every rock, every tree, every shadow seemed deliberate, as if the woods were rearranging themselves around me to confuse and trap me. The whispers were relentless now, overlapping and speaking in every voice I had ever known. They knew my fears, my regrets, my secret thoughts. "Why did you leave us?" one said in the tone of my father. "You can't escape," another whispered, using my own voice. I stumbled into a hollow lined with twisted roots, a small pool of stagnant water reflecting moonlight. In the reflection, the figure appeared behind me, taller, darker, faceless. I spun around, but the clearing was empty. When I looked back into the water, the figure smiled. A smile I didn't recognize, yet somehow felt familiar. I knew then that the forest didn't just want to trap me. It wanted to replace me. Panic surged. I scrambled out of the hollow, plunging through underbrush, tripping over unseen roots. The forest responded instantly. Shadows thickened, the whispers became a cacophony, and the ground seemed to shift beneath me, subtly but unmistakably. Every time I thought I was gaining distance, the trail looped back, placing the cabin I had glimpsed earlier impossibly close. The faceless figure appeared again, standing silently at the edge of a clearing, impossibly tall, limbs bending unnaturally. Its presence radiated patience and malice at once. I couldn't look away, yet I couldn't move closer. A voice, soft but commanding, echoed directly inside my mind. "You've learned the trail. Now, it will learn you." I realized my memory, my identity, my thoughts were being recorded, folded into the forest. Every step I took, every breath I drew, was cataloged. Survival didn't matter. Compliance did. I ran faster than I ever had, knowing the forest would remember me forever. Dawn never came the way I expected. When the first pale light filtered through the trees, the forest looked normal. Too normal. The twisted shadows, the shifting paths, the whispers. They were gone. But I knew better. The forest had not released me. I stumbled onto what appeared to be the main trail. The underbrush looked familiar, almost welcoming. Relief surged briefly, until I noticed footprints beside mine, bare, elongated, impossibly perfect. matching my steps exactly. My blood ran cold. Every movement I made, every decision, had been observed and recorded. When I glanced back, I saw faint silhouettes disappearing between the trees, vanishing like smoke. The whispers returned, soft and insistent, echoing inside my head. Remember, never forget. We will wait. I fled the forest entirely, never daring to look back. But I can't forget. Every sound of the wind in the pines, every rustle of leaves, brings the trail back to me, alive, waiting. The forest doesn't forgive. It doesn't forget. Months later, I tried to return, just once, to prove it was all in my mind. The entrance was blocked by fallen trees, unnaturally aligned, forming a perfect barrier. Every attempt to locate the trail failed. It was as if the forest had erased it completely. But the whispers never stopped. In quiet moments, when I sit alone in my apartment, I hear them faintly, my own voice repeating things I thought forgotten, questions I never asked, memories I never shared. I can almost feel the forest folding around me, waiting for the next time I wander too far. I no longer hike. I no longer wander. I avoid the woods entirely. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the trail, the shifting paths, the faceless figure, and I know it remembers me as I remember it. And one day, if I step off the safe path, it will be waiting. My name is Lucas Moreno, and this happened during a hiking trip at Raven Ridge National Park. I had always been drawn to challenging trails, the ones that promised isolation and the raw beauty of the mountains. But this trail was different. The air felt heavier as soon as I stepped onto the ridge, and the wind carried whispers I couldn't place. Soft, distant, almost beckoning. The first hour passed uneventfully. The sun glinted off jagged rocks, pine needles crunched beneath my boots, and the scent of damp earth filled the air. I felt alone in the best way possible, or so I thought. By midday, I noticed something strange. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision, but when I turned, there was nothing. At first, I chalked it up to light and terrain, but the shadows didn't behave naturally. They lingered, stretching unnaturally, following me over rocks and roots without moving from their spots. A chill ran down my spine. I wasn't alone. Something, or someone, was hiking with me. By mid-afternoon, the wind grew colder, carrying faint whispers that seemed to mimic my own movements. I would step onto a rock, and the rustle behind me would mirror me exactly. Every glance over my shoulder revealed fleeting silhouettes that disappeared instantly, leaving only the echo of footsteps on stone. I reached a small plateau overlooking the valley. The view was breathtaking, but the shadows were closer now. One figure stood at the edge of the plateau, far too tall and still to be human. I waved, but it didn't respond. It simply watched, its head tilting unnaturally as if studying me. Panic started to rise. I considered turning back, but the trail behind me seemed different. Trees and rocks rearranged. Paths I had taken now vanished or led to dead ends. I realized then that the ridge wasn't just a trail. It was alive, bending reality around me. And the shadow. It knew exactly where I was headed. As the sun dipped lower, the shadows grew bolder. Every time I paused to catch my breath, I felt them inching closer, though my eyes never saw the movement. The ridge narrowed, jagged rocks on either side, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying words I couldn't place, soft, commanding, familiar. I stumbled upon a fallen tree bridging a small gap in the trail. As I crossed it, the shadow mirrored me perfectly, stepping in rhythm with my movements. My heart pounded. I tried to run, but the trail seemed to stretch endlessly, bending and looping in impossible ways. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of its face, or what should have been a face. Blank, pale, elongated, with no features except for faint eyes that glimmered faintly like dying coals. It wasn't just following me. It was learning me, predicting me, shaping the path itself. I realized with a sinking feeling that this hike wasn't just dangerous. It was hunting me, testing me, and I had no idea what the rules were. By twilight, the wind carried a low hum, almost a chant. Every shadow along the ridge seemed to bend and twist toward me, following me, anticipating my next step. My flashlight beam revealed glimpses of the terrain, but the trail kept shifting, rocks sliding subtly, tree roots rearranging themselves as if the ridge itself was alive. I stopped at a narrow ledge overlooking a steep drop. The shadow appeared again, closer now, its height impossible, limbs unnaturally long, moving with grace and silence. My instincts screamed at me to jump, to run, to hide, but my body felt frozen. Then I saw it. Another shadow emerging, smaller, copying my exact posture, crouching as I crouched, stepping when I stepped. My pulse skyrocketed. The forested ridge wasn't just alive. It was multiplying, creating echoes of me to trap me further. I swallowed hard, realizing that escape was no longer a matter of distance, but of wits. Or perhaps luck. Night fell quickly over Raven Ridge, swallowing the trail in inky darkness. The shadows no longer lingered at the edges. They followed every step I took. My flashlight flickered repeatedly, threatening to die. And with each flicker, I caught glimpses of multiple faceless figures, their forms stretching unnaturally across the rocks. I stumbled over jagged roots and loose stones, my mind fraying with every echo of footsteps that wasn't mine. Then I heard it. A voice, my voice, faint and low, repeating thoughts I had never spoken aloud. "You can't leave?" it whispered. The words seemed to come from every direction at once, bouncing off rocks and trees, creating a disorienting maze of sound. I realized the ridge was no longer a trail. It was a predator, alive and aware. Every path I chose, every hesitation, was recorded, anticipated. The shadows weren't just following me. They were shaping the forest, bending it to ensure I could never escape completely. I forced my legs forward, adrenaline fueling my desperate flight deeper into the darkness. Hours dragged on. Every step forward felt like an eternity. Yet the ridge seemed to shrink behind me, looping impossibly. The shadows multiplied, rising from rocks, trees, and even the thin mist that hugged the ground. They weren't attacking. They were watching, patient and calculating. I reached a small plateau with a twisted, ancient pine in the center. Its gnarled branches seemed to reach toward me. As I approached, the whispers intensified, repeating secrets I didn't know I had forgotten. Names of old friends, regrets, even thoughts I hadn't spoken in years, all echoed through the cold night air. The tallest shadow stepped onto the plateau, and the smaller, mimicking forms arranged themselves around me like a ritual circle. I realized the ridge had learned me, recorded me, and now demanded a performance. Compliance, fear, surrender. My mind screamed to run, but every instinct told me there was nowhere left to escape. I braced myself, knowing the next move could determine whether I survived the night. By the 7th hour, my fear had transformed into a cold, numbing awareness. Every shadow moved with purpose, every whisper repeating not just my words, but my movements, my thoughts, my fears. I could no longer tell which way was forward, which way was the ridge, which way was real. The tallest shadow stepped closer, its head tilting unnaturally. I caught a faint glimmer in its faceless visage, something almost human but twisted, reflecting every doubt I had ever felt. The smaller shadows mirrored me exactly. Each subtle motion I made repeated like a cruel puppet show. I realized with horror that the ridge wasn't just alive. It was aware, patient, and eternal. The shadows weren't following me. They were learning me, recording my fear, storing it. Every instinct screamed to run, yet every path seemed to fold back into itself. The forest, the ridge, the shadows, they were all one. A predator with infinite patience. I had to move, even if I had no idea where I was going. I ran blindly, crashing over roots and loose stones, feeling the ridge twist beneath my feet, the shadows pacing silently behind me. Every time I glanced back, the tallest figure had moved impossibly closer, limbs bending unnaturally, stretching across rocks, trees, and mist. The smaller shadows mirrored my every action, creating the sensation that I was surrounded by countless copies of myself. The whispers were deafening now, overlapping voices echoing my regrets, my fears, my private thoughts. I realized they weren't random. They were personalized, targeted, feeding off my mind as I ran. Suddenly, the trail opened onto a cliff edge I hadn't seen before. The shadows paused at the precipice, waiting, patient. The wind howled through the ridge, carrying whispers. You cannot leave. You belong. I swallowed hard, chest heaving. I had reached the edge of the world, or at least the edge of the ridge. The forest, the shadows, and the trail itself were watching, waiting for my next move. The first light of dawn did not bring relief. The ridge appeared calm, almost beautiful in the pale light. But I knew better. The shadows were patient. They had only paused. My mind raced, trying to calculate a path that wouldn't fold back into itself. But the forest and the ridge had become a labyrinth. I stepped cautiously along the edge of the cliff, heart pounding, when I noticed footprints beside mine. Not my own. These were long, elongated, perfectly mimicking my steps. Every motion I made had been anticipated. The whispers returned, softer now, but insidious. We know you. You belong. You will return. The tallest shadow appeared at the edge, still faceless, still impossibly still. I understood then that survival wasn't about speed, skill, or endurance. It was about submission. The ridge had learned me, recorded me, and now it wanted me to exist only as part of its shadows. I ran blindly, knowing I might never escape, but somehow clinging to the hope that daylight might give me a chance. Hours later, I found the park entrance, or what looked like it. The trail behind me had returned to normal, but I could feel it in my bones. The ridge had not forgotten. The shadows were gone, yet their presence lingered in every gust of wind, every rustle of leaves, every tremor of the earth beneath my feet. I swore I would never return to Raven Ridge. I no longer hike alone, nor do I wander into isolated trails. But even here in my apartment, the whispers sometimes creep back. They echo my own thoughts, my fears, my secrets, faintly at first, then louder, as if the ridge itself reaches across miles. I know one day I might misstep, wander too far, and the shadows will return. They are patient, eternal, and endlessly hungry for the next hiker to record, to mimic, to claim. Raven Ridge waits, and it always remembers. My name is Samantha Keene, and this happened during a solo trip to Blackwood National Park. I had rented a remote cabin deep in the woods, seeking solitude and a break from city life. The first day was perfect, rustling leaves, crisp air, and the faint scent of pine. I thought I was prepared for isolation. As evening approached, An unnatural quiet settled over the forest. Even the wind seemed hesitant to move. When I stepped outside to watch the sunset, I noticed the surrounding trees cast shadows that didn't align with the light. One shadow, darker and more solid than the rest, lingered near the tree line, unmoving, as if watching me. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was my imagination. But as night fell, the forest grew oppressive, and I began to hear whispers, not carried by the wind, but coming from inside the cabin itself. Names I didn't know, words I couldn't comprehend, soft but unmistakable, echoing in the wooden walls. I realized then that I was not as alone as I thought. Night fully descended, and the cabin felt alive with tension. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, echoing from corners, from the ceiling, even beneath the floorboards. I tried to ignore them, but each time I moved, they seemed to follow, anticipating my steps. A knock came from the front door. My heart froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, I approached, flashlight trembling in hand, only to find the porch empty. A faint footprint, muddy, oddly elongated, marred the wood. It wasn't mine, and I hadn't seen anyone come near. I checked every window. Everything appeared normal. Yet the whispers persisted, sometimes soft and distant, sometimes loud enough to rattle my nerves. Objects in the cabin seemed slightly out of place. A chair turned toward the wall, a book on the floor that hadn't been there before. By midnight, I understood. The cabin was not just haunted, it was aware. It watched, it waited, and it was learning me. I tried to calm myself, convincing myself it was just nerves. I poured a cup of tea and sat by the fireplace, listening to the crackle of the flames. But even there, the whispers persisted. They seemed to come from the walls, low murmurs threading together words I could almost understand. Then I noticed something I hadn't before. The shadows in the cabin didn't match the flickering light. They moved independently, stretching along the walls, bending around corners, and pooling near doorways. One shadow, taller and darker than the rest, lingered near the back wall. I blinked and it vanished, but I could still feel it. A sudden crash from the kitchen made me jump. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped cautiously inside. The room was empty, but a faint trail of muddy footprints led toward the back door, ending abruptly at the threshold. My breath came in shallow gasps. The cabin wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it wanted me to notice. I opened the back door, expecting to see the dark woods. But the forest outside looked unnaturally still. No wind, no rustling leaves, no moonlight filtering through the trees. Only an oppressive, silent darkness that seemed to press against me. As I stepped onto the porch, a movement caught my eye. A figure standing at the edge of the tree line, impossibly tall, faceless, unmoving. I froze, unable to scream or look away. My instincts screamed at me to retreat, but my body felt paralyzed by fear. Suddenly, the whispers inside the cabin intensified, repeating my own name, my thoughts, my secrets. It was as if the cabin itself, and whatever dwelled within the forest beyond, was reading me. Each word echoed, twisting in my mind, guiding me back toward the interior. With a trembling hand, I slammed the door shut, locking it. But I knew it had already learned me. The night had only just begun. The night stretched endlessly. Every sound felt amplified. The creak of floorboards, the rustle of leaves outside, the faint thud of something brushing against the cabin walls. My flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, revealing only distorted shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. I tried to stay rational, checking doors and windows repeatedly. Yet each time I turned around, the furniture had shifted slightly. objects subtly rearranged, as if the cabin itself were mocking me. Then I noticed muddy footprints on the wooden floor, leading from the back door to the living room. I hadn't stepped outside. A cold breeze swept through, carrying whispers that mimicked my own voice, speaking thoughts I hadn't dared speak aloud. I realized with a sinking feeling that the cabin wasn't just observing, it was recording me, memorizing my fears, cataloging my movements. I hugged myself, trying to block it out. But I knew that staying still meant nothing. The cabin demanded engagement, compliance, and perhaps surrender. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I had lost all sense of time. The shadows grew bolder, stretching toward me across the floor and up the walls. I could feel them watching, pressing, suffocating. The whispers had grown into coherent phrases. "You can't leave. You belong here. You are ours." I tried to retreat to the bedroom, but the hallway seemed to stretch impossibly long, the walls bending subtly, disorienting me. Each door I opened led to a slightly different space than before. My mind was fraying, reality bending around the cabin. A sudden movement caught my eye. The tall, faceless figure was inside the living room now, standing near the fireplace, unmoving, but impossibly real. The air around it felt cold and heavy, pressing against my chest. I realized that the cabin and the figure were connected, one feeding off the other, learning and adapting. Survival depended not on running, but on understanding its rules, if understanding was even possible. By the 7th hour, I felt completely unmoored from reality. The cabin had become a living entity, bending space, time, and perception to its will. Every shadow moved independently, stretching unnaturally, pooling near corners, and flicking in response to my slightest motion. I tried to leave, but every exit led back into the same oppressive space. The faceless figure stood silently at the end of the hallway, impossibly tall, limbs bending in ways that defied logic. The whispers now carried intent, repeating my deepest fears, my regrets, and my mistakes in a mocking cadence. I realized with horror that this was no longer about me staying safe. The cabin wanted something from me, my attention, my fear, my submission. Every movement I made was recorded, cataloged, and mirrored. I understood then that escaping might not be about running, but about surviving the cabin's mind games. I backed slowly, trembling, as the shadows crept closer, waiting, patient, eternal. The whispers intensified, now forming a coherent, almost musical rhythm. Every word was directed at me, pulling at memories and fears I had buried deep. Objects in the room moved subtly. Chairs shifted, books fell, and doors creaked as if opening by themselves. The faceless figure stepped closer, and the floorboard seemed to groan under its impossible weight. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My own reflection appeared in the window behind me, and for a fleeting moment, it wasn't my reflection. It was the figure's face, faceless yet mocking, staring back. I stumbled backward into the kitchen, where a faint trail of footprints led toward the basement door. The cabin had a final lesson prepared for me, a choice that wasn't really a choice. Descend into the unknown or be consumed by the shadows that now dominated every corner of the house. I swallowed hard, realizing that the night was far from over, and the cabin's true hunger was yet to be revealed. The basement door loomed before me, black and silent, exuding an almost tangible dread. My flashlight trembled in my hand, casting weak, flickering light over the steps leading downward. The whispers intensified, now chanting my name in a low, menacing cadence. Each step I took echoed unnaturally, as if the cabin itself were amplifying my fear. As I descended, the air grew colder, heavier. Shadows clung to the walls and corners, forming shapes that were almost human, almost alive. The faceless figure appeared at the foot of the stairs, impossibly still, its presence pressing against my chest. I felt watched from every angle, every corner, every inch of the basement. Then I saw it. A shallow pit in the center of the floor, filled with mist. And within the mist, faint silhouettes mimicking my every movement. The cabin had created a reflection of me, my fear, my life, trapped forever beneath the floorboards. I realized, with chilling clarity, that the cabin didn't just haunt, it imprisoned. I ran blindly through the basement, heart pounding, flashlight beams shaking wildly. Every shadow lunged and twisted toward me, but when I glanced back, the faceless figure remained at the pit's edge, unmoving, watching, waiting. The whispers became a cacophony of voices, each echoing my fears, my failures, my regrets. I scrambled up the stairs, bursting into the main cabin room. The door to the outside was in sight, but the shadows moved faster than reality, cutting off my escape in ways that defied logic. I flung open a window and dove into the cold night air, rolling down the porch steps. Behind me, the cabin sat silent once more, its shadows retreating, but I knew it was only waiting, storing its knowledge of me for the next time. I never returned to Blackwood National Park. Even now, years later, faint whispers in the memory of faceless shadows haunt my dreams. The cabin remembers. It waits. And I know that one day, if I wander too far, it will claim me again. My name is Ethan Rivers, and this happened during my summer internship as a park ranger at Granite Falls National Park. I had always loved the wilderness, the crisp air, the endless forests, and the sound of rushing waterfalls. But nothing could have prepared me for the terror that lurked beyond the trails. It began on my third week. Two senior rangers, Mike and Clara, had gone on a routine patrol along the northern ridge and never returned. Search teams scoured the area, but they vanished without a trace. The forest seemed to swallow all evidence, leaving only faint footprints that disappeared into dense underbrush. When I was assigned to continue the investigation, I felt the weight of unease pressing against my chest. The trails twisted strangely, landmarks I had memorized seemed rearranged, and a cold wind carried whispers that mimicked voices of the missing rangers. Something was wrong here. Something in the forest didn't want to be found. I realized that Granite Falls held secrets far darker than anyone could imagine. The forest grew thicker as I followed the trails left by Mike and Clara. Every step seemed to echo unnaturally, and I could swear I heard footsteps behind me, but strangely intact. Tents were set up, a campsite, abandoned but strangely intact. Tents were set up, a fire pit cold, and personal items left scattered, as if the rangers had simply stepped away. Yet something felt wrong. The surrounding trees seemed to bend toward the site, shadows pooling unnaturally, almost watching. Then I heard it. A faint whistle, soft, almost playful, coming from deeper in the forest. It was Clara's voice, calling my name, but distorted, warped. My stomach twisted. I wanted to run back, but something compelled me forward. Curiosity and fear intertwined. I realized then that the forest was alive in a way that no human could control or escape. The deeper I ventured, the more unnatural the forest became. Trees seemed impossibly tall, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers, blocking out the sky. Every trail I tried to follow appeared to loop back on itself, leaving me disoriented and dizzy. The air grew colder, carrying whispers that mimicked the voices of Mike and Clara, sometimes pleading, sometimes mocking. I stumbled across a small clearing where the ground was littered with broken branches and strange markings, almost like symbols carved into the earth. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I bent closer. The markings pulsed faintly in the darkness, and the whispers crescendoed into low, guttural tones that felt alive, crawling beneath my skin. A sudden rustle behind me made me spin around, but nothing was there. Just the forest, alive and waiting. I understood then that the northern ridge was no ordinary part of Granite Falls. It was a place that remembered, that hunted, that consumed those who entered too deeply. I pressed onward, each step feeling heavier than the last. The forest seemed to shift around me. The trails I knew twisted into unfamiliar paths, boulders appearing where none had been, streams flowing backward as if mocking reality. The whispers grew louder, carrying faint cries that I recognized as Mike and Clara's voices, desperate and terrified. Suddenly, I saw movement ahead, 2 figures standing among the trees. Relief surged through me. I thought I had found them. But as I drew closer, my stomach dropped. The figures were wrong. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, limbs bending in impossible ways. Their faces were pale, blank, and featureless, yet somehow familiar. The air grew icy, and my breath came in visible clouds as I realized I was not looking at the Rangers, but at shadows shaped like them, copies created by the forest itself. Fear gripped me. Granite Falls was no ordinary wilderness. It was sentient, and it had already claimed my friends. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, as the shadow figures turned slowly toward me, eerily mirroring my own movements. The whispers merged into a low chant, repeating my name over and over, weaving my fear into the forest itself. Every instinct screamed to run, but the trails had shifted again, looping impossibly, leaving me trapped in a maze that belonged to the forest alone. I tried calling out to Mike and Clara, hoping some part of them was still human, still aware. The forest responded with laughter, a distorted, echoing mockery that froze my blood. Then the ground beneath me trembled, small rocks tumbling into a hidden ravine. The shadows stepped forward in unison, and I realized that whatever had taken the Rangers was learning from me, adapting, waiting for the perfect moment. I clutched my flashlight, its beam flickering weakly. The forest had become a predator, and I was its prey, every breath and heartbeat recorded for a darkness that seemed endless. The northern ridge seemed to close in on me, trees leaning unnaturally, branches reaching like claws. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in near total darkness. The whispers now surrounded me from every direction, voices overlapping, repeating my thoughts, my fears, my regrets in a way that felt alive. I fumbled through the underbrush blindly, tripping over roots and rocks, my ears straining for any natural sound. Then I saw it, a faint glow deep in the forest. Hope surged, but instinct told me to be careful. I approached, heart hammering, and saw a small clearing lit by an unnatural greenish light. Shadows of figures moved across the trees, dancing and stretching impossibly, and in the center, faint outlines of Mike and Clara were visible, but wrong. Their forms distorted, faces blank, limbs bending. The forest had trapped them, reshaped them, and I knew I could become another copy if I let my fear guide me. I had to stay sharp. By the 7th hour, the forest had completely overtaken my senses. The trees no longer felt solid. They moved subtly, leaning toward me, shifting in ways that made me dizzy. The shadow forms of Mike and Clara circled the clearing, mimicking human movements, but with a jerky, unnatural precision. The whispers had become almost intelligible, repeating my name and my deepest fears. taunting me with visions of the two rangers trapped forever. I realized with horror that the forest wasn't just hiding them. It had reshaped them, twisted their forms into extensions of itself. The green glow pulsed faintly in the clearing, illuminating the grotesque mockery of life and shadows intertwined. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the paths behind me had vanished, leaving only darkness and the oppressive presence of the forest. My mind raced. Survival no longer meant finding the trail. It meant navigating a living nightmare, understanding rules I could barely comprehend, and hoping I didn't become the next distorted shadow. I moved cautiously, every step deliberate, trying not to draw attention. The distorted shadows paused when I shifted, watching, waiting. The green glow illuminated symbols etched into tree trunks and rocks, ancient, twisted, pulsating faintly. They seemed to mark the boundaries of the forest's claim, warning intruders like me to proceed with caution. Suddenly, the whispers converged into a single, piercing voice. "You cannot leave. You belong." My stomach churned, and I realized the forest was learning not only my actions, but my thoughts, my fear, my desperation. The distorted shapes of Mike and Clara advanced closer, jerky limbs bending in ways that made my skin crawl. I could feel the forest closing in. Every attempt to turn back led me deeper into the nightmare. The glow intensified, casting long, grotesque shadows that twisted reality. I understood that leaving alive would require not speed, but cunning, courage, and a hope that the forest's hunger might be momentarily distracted. The green glow pulsed brighter, casting grotesque shadows across the forest floor. I ran blindly, stumbling over roots and rocks, my breath ragged, my heart hammering. The distorted shadows of Mike and Clara moved in eerie unison, cutting off every escape route. The forest itself seemed alive, branches twisting and bending to block my path, leaves forming shapes that mirrored my every fear. Then I saw a narrow trail, almost hidden among the twisted pines, barely wide enough to escape. I sprinted toward it, ignoring the whispers now screaming my name, pleading and mocking at the same time. The shadows hesitated for a moment, then resumed pursuit. My hands bled from clutching branches and rocks. But I didn't stop. Survival meant putting distance between me and the forest. But the forest had already memorized me. It knew my speed, my tactics, even my panic. Somewhere in the darkness, I realized that leaving the forest alive wouldn't guarantee freedom. Granite Falls remembered, and it waited. Finally, dawn broke, pale sunlight filtering through the dense canopy. I emerged near the park entrance, exhausted, bleeding, and shaking. The shadows had vanished, the green glow extinguished, leaving only the normal, serene forest that anyone would expect. But I knew better. Granite Falls had learned me, observed me, and my friends were gone, twisted into extensions of the forest's hunger. Even now, years later, I can hear the faint whispers in my dreams. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow cast in dim light, reminds me of what waits in Granite Falls. The forest doesn't forget. It watches, it learns, and it claims. And though I survived, I know the next time someone wanders too deep, the forest will be ready. Granite Falls is patient. Granite Falls never forgets. And Granite Falls will always hunger.